Greetings, you can call me GM Comfortable Grey, and I am pleased to share my GM preparation for the Fabula Ultima free RPG Day one-shot with all of you. Spoiler alert, the first section of this video is for anybody, but at its core, this is GM prep, so if you're a player, I will highlight it as soon as you reach the section that you should not cross. If you do so, it is your own memetic hazard. I am a professional game master, but I also run my fair share of free games as well. In the spirit of this, I have prepared a Foundry VTT module specifically for the official Fabula Ultima Start Playing adventure. By no means do you need a virtual tabletop to run Fabula Ultima, but I have a personal standard for the adventures that I game master, and this is an excellent example of my own expectations for myself. Any pen and paper RPG can be played entirely by theater of the mind, but I find that scenes tend to go more smoothly with some type of visual aid. Especially because I run most of my games online, where players can't see my expressions or gestures, and we can't share tabletop with hand-drawn maps, I use a virtual tabletop. My preference is for Foundry VTT. After that, I like to use Tabletop Simulator, but if you don't have either of those, then you can use Roll20 or Owlbear Rodeo, which are perfectly serviceable, free alternatives. I'll be making this Foundry world available for download. All of the assets were directly from the Press Start PDF or made freely available online by the creator. If at any point it isn't obvious where the asset came from, I do my best to give credit to the artist somewhere on the canvas. I will occasionally be referring to the full rules of Fabula Ultima. This is mostly to contrast them to what is available in Press Start. There is no reason you cannot play this tutorial with the full rules, but by the rules as written, some parts of the character sheet are locked off from player use until a certain scene is reached. Here we have the introduction. We're going to go over what you need. You're going to need a game master and at least one player. You'll be much better off with 4 players on this adventure, but I'm going to mention a few ways that you can run this with fewer or up to 6. If you're playing in person, you will also need character sheets, pencils, and dice. Fabula Ultima uses 6, 8, 10, 12, and rarely 20-sided dice. These are usually referred to as D number, where the number is how many sides they have. Fabula Ultima declares a role-playing game to be a game where a group of people have a conversation and describe the actions of the characters they control to create a story. When you role-play, you make decisions for your characters by playing the role of their goals and objectives. TTRPGs are cooperative games, and so you will be cooperating with the people you are playing with, expressing your creativity and making the story as memorable as possible for all of you. Remember to respect each other's ideas. Unlike a board game, a book, or a video game, a role-playing game has endless possibilities. The numbers and abilities on the character sheets illustrate the strengths and weaknesses of each entity in the world. The rules are used to represent whether an action is successful or creates unforeseen circumstances. You cannot and should not try to predict what will happen. Discovering the story together is part of the fun. The 2 roles are the game master, known as the GM, and the players, all of which are authors, protagonists, and audience to the story that emerges from their conversation. The GM has the additional task of being the world and the actors within it that react to the emerging chronicle. The characters included are going to be the 4 pre-made characters, but you can make your own using the official Fabula Ultima Core rulebook or by changing the traits of the pre-mades. Because Press Start is a tutorial adventure, they pace it by keeping some sections of the character sheet locked away from player use until a certain scene is reached. To help you, we're going to look at all the parts that make up a character sheet right now. There are 4 attributes, which govern almost all of the dice you'll be rolling for your character. There's Dexterity, known as DEX. It's a mixture of precision, agility, and reflexes. Insight, INS, a perception, intellect, and empathy signifier. Might, MIG, which is the character's physical power and their resistance, as well as willpower, which is the strength of personality and their discipline. The pre-made characters in Press Start all have what the core rulebook calls the average attribute profile. They have a D6, 2D8, and 1D10 between all 4 attributes. The core rulebook has 2 other attribute profiles, but we won't discuss them here. There are also 6 status effects which modify these attributes, reducing the die size by 1. These stack if your character was both slowed and enraged, for instance, their dexterity be lowered twice, but your dice cannot become smaller than a d6. there is no D4 in Fabula Ultima. You resolve actions through something called a check. There are a few types of checks, but generally, a player will refer to the attributes on their character sheet. Depending on what they want to do, they will roll the dice composed of 2 attributes. The sum of these 2 dice rolled, plus or minus any modifiers, is the result, which gets compared to the difficulty level. Some of these sample checks are hard physical labor, like pushing a boulder in front of a cave or using a heavy weapon, would be might plus might. Sneaking around, using a whip or short bow in combat would be dexterity plus dexterity. If you're studying a scene, character, or object, it would be an insight plus insight roll, while making a passionate speech or in arcanist's rituals would be willpower plus willpower. There's also chances where you'll be using more than one attribute, such as to quickly barricade an entrance, or the most common melee weapon check is might plus dex. To anticipate someone's movement and intercept them, you would make a dexterity plus insight check, which is also the initiative check and a common ranged weapon check. Making a reasoned argument would be insight plus willpower, which is also the most common spellcasting check. And all of these are compared to whatever the result is as the difficulty level to beat. This is a meet or beat game, and the most common difficulty level, known as DL, is 10. Easier things might be 7, harder things might be 13, and in combat, the DL for actions is often determined by the attributes of a target, such as their defense, and it can be modified by equipment or circumstances. Modifiers can either be positive, where they're known as bonuses, or negative, where they're known as penalties. These are cumulative. So if your character has a +1 bonus from having an accurate weapon, but a -2 situational penalty, such as trying to fight a bat in the dark, it would become a net -1 penalty. After comparing the result to the DL, it's going to determine whether it's a success, a failure, a fumble, or a critical success. These are all the possible outcomes of a check. If you meet or beat the DL, this is considered a success. Sometimes it works outright. Sometimes you might need to determine the degree of success. This is usually for damage in combat, but there may be some other instances where a GM might ask for the high roll, which is of the 2 dice rolled, which one is rolled higher? And this is abbreviated by the HR. Damage is typically the HR plus some modifier for the weapon. If the result is less than the DL, then it is a failure. Sometimes, failure will have consequences beyond not completing the goal. These could be mechanical consequences, such as a status effect or HP loss, or it could be narrative, such as losing the opportunity to approach your goal in that way. Typically, a character who fails a check may only try again using a different approach. For example, if your character wants to overload a Magitech core, they could try to use their magical skills. If that fails, then perhaps they'll need to rewire it to blow a fuse using technical skills. Either method will still achieve the goal of damaging the core. If the dice both roll the same number, and the number is 6 or higher, then it is a critical success. The check succeeds automatically, even if the result is less than the DL, and you get to apply the effects of an opportunity. In Press Start, there are only a few opportunities listed. There are other ones within the core Fabula Ultima rulebook. Such opportunities are a +4 bonus to the next check of the roller's choice. That could be to the roller themselves or to an ally. You could inflict a status effect on the target. You could ask the GM a single question about the scene, or you could fill or erase 2 seconds of a clock, which we'll discuss later, and you can add 1 emotion to one of your bonds, or create a new bond on your sheet with 1 emotion. And bonds are another one of the traits we'll be discussing later on. If both dice roll a 1, then the result is a fumble, also known as a critical failure. No matter what, even if modifiers would bring the result to the difficulty level, that check is a failure. Whoever controls the opposition in the scene gets to apply an opportunity, but in exchange, the player character does earn 1 Fabula point, one of the resources we'll be discussing soon. After the attributes, which you use to determine your checks, there are traits and bonds. Within the traits are your identity. This is what the character perceives themselves to be at the time. This is usually a short phrase, which can evolve during play. Blair Clarimond is the heir to the throne of De Nova. There's a theme, a driving force behind a character's motives, typically an attitude, virtue, or thought, which can also change during play. Blair has a theme of duty, likely to the kingdom they're due to inherit, de novo. Origin is where that character comes from, such as their homeland or town, which will not change during play. Bonds, typically in the full game, you can have up to 6, but the tutorial only allows you to have up to 3. Each of these are a connection to a concept, another character, or a location, and have up to 3 emotions which determine the level of the bond. The emotions are paired off for a positive and negative. There's admiration and inferiority, loyalty and mistrust, or affection and hatred. You start the game with 0 bonds during the tutorial, but if you are making your own character, your GM might allow you to have 1 or more bonds. These will be changing frequently throughout play. For the resources, I was discussing before that you've got Fabula points. Fabula points are essentially what you use to control the narrative. You start the game with 3 Fabula points, and you also gain 1 whenever you fumble a check, a villain enters the scene, or when your character is reduced to 0 hit points and they surrender. You can spend a Fabula point to invoke one of your traits, or re-roll 1 or both dice, so long as you didn't fumble that check. Such as for Blair, if Blair was making a check that was indicative of their duty, then so long as they didn't fumble, they could re-roll 1 or both of the dice if they failed the additional check. You can also spend a Fabula point to invoke a bond. If your character has bonds, then once per check, you can add the strength of the bond to the roll, if it's relevant. Sometimes certain skills will require a Fabula point to activate, but also every player character can spend a Fabula point to alter the story. This will require GM permission, and it should never contradict or remove something. It should only add something to the story, which, if it has a mechanical consequence, like damage or status effects, those consequences are entirely up to the GM. The usual example I use for altering the story is if nobody said there was a chandelier that your character could cut inside the throne room, then you spend a Fabula point. There is a chandelier, you cut a rope, and then it falls down and hits and scatters some of your enemies. It's going to be up to the GM what the actual consequences are, but because you're adding the chandelier, you're not saying it was never there in the first place, that should be okay. Here is most of what we're going to have on the first page of this character sheet. And you see that these have these little red numbers. Those are indicating when, on which scene, those should be unlocked for the players to use. We kind of have to go back and forth because we had up to 6 on the previous page, but we skipped 4 and 5. Here we have your hit points, your HP, and your mind points, your MP. These are secondary attributes derived from your character's might or willpower, respectively. They are also modified by the classes and skills of this game. More details on that can be found in the core Fabula rulebook. These are abstractions of your character's durability or focus. Each has a maximum and current value. Unless stated otherwise, effects cannot make the current value higher than the maximum value. Hit points are abbreviated as HP and generally show how much damage or pain a character's body can sustain before they collapse. When a character's HP is equal to or less than half their maximum HP, rounded down, they are in crisis. Certain effects and skills activate or change when a character is in crisis. When a character's current HP hits 0, they have to choose whether they surrender or have heroic sacrifices. More on those later. While a character is losing HP, it can be described as bumps, bruises, bleeding, or near misses, but it shouldn't mean severe harm until they are at 0 current HP. The mind points, known as MP, are used for acts of incredible skill and also spent when using magic. Current MP can never go below 0, so if your character does not have enough MP to activate an ability, then you cannot do so. 0 MP does not cause your character to black out. They just can't activate anything that costs MP. Most equipment in Fabula Ultima is determined by your character's traits. If it makes sense for them to have something, then they do. You'd say that Blair, as the heir to the throne of Denova, would probably have an insignia ring, maybe some jewelry, and some other finery that just makes sense for the character. If there's something that you wanted to have that you wouldn't necessarily have according to your traits, maybe you wanted to say Blair bought some lockpicks In the previous town, that's what you would spend your inventory points for, as well as the consumables. Otherwise, characters all have what I call equipment slots, one for each hand, one for their armor, and one for an accessory for a total of 4. Some weapons, shield, and armor are martial types, and your character is not proficient with them unless they have a level in a class that gives that proficiency. All of these types of equipment cost a currency to acquire, of which Zenith is the default for a Fabula Ultima world, and they will directly modify a character's actions or defenses. Armor is going to either modify a character's defense, magic defense, or their initiative. Some types of armor replace their defense with a specific value, but most will be giving a bonus. Weapons have a variety of categories, such as the bows, brawling, or swords categories. They're used in the attack action, and each has their own attributes for accuracy and uses the HR plus some value for damage. Most weapons are one-handed, and so they can be used with a shield in the other hand, while others are two-handed and cannot. Two-weapon fighting is something that exists in Fabula Ultima. By default, you require the specific circumstance where that character has a one-handed weapon of the same category in each hand. Then, they can choose to attack with both. Each attack will be making their own check, but the weapon will lose the multi-property if they had it previously, and you will treat the HR as 0 for both attacks' damages. Shields directly modify a character's defense or magic defense. Accessories are a rarer type of equipment. They are typically too expensive to start the game with, but they have wide and varied effects. The most common is giving the character resistance to one type of damage, but they can be quite unique. The core rulebook suggests making some of your own accessories, unique to your world. There is only one accessory slot, so it's up to the players to choose the right one for the task at hand. Consumables aren't declared until they are used, at which time some inventory points are spent. And press start, the characters have access to consumables, remedy, elixir, and tonic, but there are additional consumables in the rulebook, and it's suggested that you make some for your own world as well. The inventory points are usually abbreviated as IP, and they are used to declare your character's use of a consumable item, or is what you would spend to say that they purchased a piece of equipment that doesn't match their traits. The default maximum is 6, but some classes and some skills can change the capacity or how they are recovered. The Zenith default is 500, and then additionally, characters will be rolling some dice for any additional spending gold that doesn't cover their starting equipment. There are other actions in play as well. The last ones to be unlocked are the inventory action, which covers producing a consumable item and administering it to yourself or a target of your choice in the same action. Press start only allows for the 3 above, which do not require a check to use, but the GM may call for a check when using any consumables that might target an enemy. There's also the objective action. You attempt to effect an objective clock. The order of operations is that the player describes what they want to accomplish, and the GM decides whether a simple check would apply or if a new clock is needed. A clock is visible to everyone at the table, and typically has 4 to 12 sections. Meeting the difficulty level on a check for a clock allows the player to advance or turn back a section, plus another section for every 3 points that they beat the DL. A critical success can create an opportunity which allows 2 additional sections to be filled or emptied, while a fumble allows the opposition the same opportunity. Last is the study action. This is a simple insight plus insight check with a difficulty level of 10. It will tell you some information about a creature. However, anything else that you didn't learn through this simple check must be learned the hard way through roleplay or experimentation. You can see that if it's a difficulty level of 10 by default, it will reveal the species, maximum HP, and MP, while higher rolls will yield higher results. Some skills and spells may have uses outside of combat. This is my own terminology, but I call them open skills. For example, Player Clarimon's Flash of Insight skill enhances the study action, so additional information can be learned beyond what the basic study action gives. The Soaring Strike spell, which you can find on Cassandra, might be usable in order for the character to travel across a vast distance or can get on top of high structures. speak to your game master if you have a creative use for any of these abilities. If you don't have the Fabula Ultima rulebook, then one way you can customize the characters is by changing their names, attributes, or traits, but it's very important to the basic press start story that one character is playing the heir to the throne of Denova. It doesn't need to be Denova, but the heir to some kind of kingdom which they have a degree of duty towards. These characters are all known as starting characters. The base idea in Fabula Ultima is that you've got 5 levels when you start your character. These need to be spread between at least 2 of the classes of the game. And so I'm going to go a little bit deeper into each of these characters just so you can see what they have to make those characters. I'm only going to discuss the skills that they got from the classes and what levels they have in that class. After that, the classes do give some bonuses, some additional hit points, some proficiencies and things like that. I'm not going to discuss. You should turn to the core Fabula Ultima rulebook in order to recognize those yourself. So Blair Clarimond is a lore master, an orator, and a spiritist. This is what is giving them the flash of insight from lore master. They've got 2 ranks of orator, which is what they're using to both help allies to increase their attribute and also regain hit points. It's 5 HP per level in orator, and that's how I know because it recovers 10. They've got 2 levels in that. They also have 2 spiritist spells, which means they must have 2 ranks in the spiritual magic skill to have the spells Heal and Lux. There's also Cassandra. Cassandra is the former Skyrider captain with a theme of doubt who comes from Stormkeep. They're going to be a good choice for a character who wants a little bit of elemental magic and to be a strong, powerful, damaging character. She is an elementalist level 2 and a weapon master level 3. From Elementalist, they've got 2 ranks in the Elemental Magic skill, giving her the Elemental Weapon spell and the Soaring Strike spell, which can kind of be used together. For Weapon Master, it's 2 ranks in the Bone Crusher skill, which gives the Bone Crusher skill right there at the top, and a hidden rank in the Melee Weapon Mastery skill, which is accounting for the extra +1 to hit for the Heavy Spear. Heavy Spears are not typically an accurate weapon, so that Melee Weapon Mastery is giving Cassandra that +1. Edgar is the Tinkerer. He's a young inventor who survived something happening to Pemble, his origin, and has a theme of hope. A lot of these details are left sparse in the press start story, and then as you go through the session, both the GM and the players are going to be building up these things. What did Edgar survive is something you're going to have to ask yourself and answer for the group. He has only 1 level in Tinkerer, which gives him the Potion Range skill, but 4 levels in Sharpshooter for the Barrage, the Ranged Weapon Mastery, which is another hidden one, gives him the +1 to his pistol, and the Warning Shot skill with 2 ranks. So the Tinkerer, I would have maybe personally would have wanted him to have a few more ranks than that, but still a nice ranged combat character with the basic traits of somebody who is going to be inventing things. There's also Levine Fallbright. This is going to be the tough defending character. So from the 4 of them, we've got the support character, you kind of think of as Blair, a mixture of a bard and a cleric. There's Cassandra, who is the striker, Edgar, who is the marksman, and Levine Fallbright, who is the tank, using traditional terminology. Levine is a level 1 Darkblade for the Shadow Strike skill, 3 levels in Fury for 3 ranks in Adrenaline, which are going to come up whenever she is in crisis. That's under half hit points. And Guardian for the Protect skill. Mixture of Guardian and Adrenaline is going to make her a potent tank because there isn't really a taunt mechanic in the game, but the default guard action in combat is going to make it so that she can provide cover to another creature and then they can't be targeted. But the protect action just means that as a non-action at all, then Levine can take attacks for allies whether she guarded them or not. It's at this point I need to give the spoiler warning. Spoiler warning, we are going to be entering into the adventure proper after this. That means that players should not proceed beyond this point. You've been warned. This is my Fabula Ultima world. I try to make it as default as possible, so by starting here, you won't have anybody but the Game Master. There'll be no password, no next session date. Just go ahead, plug it in, get started. I created this with all of the scenes. I used resources available for free on the internet, such as this beautiful landing page by user Arcane Pages VTT from Reddit, and we just go right through here. I created a session 0 landing page to help you if you wanted to make your own characters or customize the pre-made characters for your adventure. There's a few rules, a nice direction you could go, but it doesn't necessarily need to go this way. Then either the same day or on another day, you can go to the session 1. These are the characters. There's little tokens for them where the story begins. And this is a nice place for people to just kind of land, get started, to look at their characters. So there's this tab, chat messages, combat encounters, which is only going to be 2 in the adventure, scenes, which are going to be the same thing that you have here on the top. But if you wanted to, you could remove their availability by toggling navigation. The items and the actors. Actors are going to be the biggest part. The PCs, there's just 4 of them. These 4 here. I made these ones bigger than they actually are, just because it kind of makes it a little bit easier to see them on this screen. If you wanted to, you could run this entire session using just the landing page. You would move these tokens wherever you need them to be, and as the monsters arrived, you could pull them up as well, and that way they can interact. It's kind of a hybrid theater of the mind situation when you do it like that, and there's nothing wrong with it. So after your landing page, we go into scene 1, the skies of Denova. This is the same scene as you would have in the actual adventure itself, the skies of Denova. Fabula Ultima did a good job of just giving you the opportunity to sort of scroll through, read along with the book, so you wouldn't necessarily need to have read this beforehand, and I still think you'd be able to have a solid adventure. They tell you to read the following aloud, introducing the city of Denova, which connects to Blair, an old man named Leon, who is transporting you on his airship to the crater of Megiddo, which still hides many powerful and terrifying secrets, and they are being investigated by the neighboring Empire of Alonia, which is the reason your heroes are headed here in the first place. Blair went against their father, King Roland's wishes, and decided to gather a group of exceptional individuals and address the situation. At this point, ask each player to describe where their character is located on the airship and what they're doing. This allows the players to take the wheel. From there, I'm going to return to my tabletop. Wherever they are, they get to roleplay a little bit, and then as they get closer to the crater of Megiddo, which I'm representing with this, they're going to be blasted by a powerful energy. I have this macro, which is going to give a little bit of a special effect to let you see that. And then they're going to need to respond to the situation one way or another. This is going to be their first check. So they can decide that they're going to try to put out the fire. They can decide that they're going to try and give this a better crash landing. Whatever they're doing, if they fail, they should get some type of status effect and maybe a couple hit points of damage in order to signify the consequences of a failed check. And then they're going to crash land no matter what. Leon, the old man, is going to help them out, give them some remedies, tonics, everything they need in order to bring them back to the top. So discourage your players from spending Fabula points during that section. They shouldn't even have them unlocked at this point, according to the rules as written in the press start situation. Then from there, they're told that Leon is going to try to repair the ship. They should go on their mission, and he's going to need their hands once they get back in order to get the ship fully functional once more. And then they move forward. And already, like that, that was 2 scenes. Easily, you can go through scene 1, 10 minutes. Scene 2, another 10 minutes, and we're moving right along. Scene 3, the shadows. This is going to be a cutscene. Essentially, you're going to be showing them these 2 villains. They're going to be getting 1 Fabula point per villain, and that just means that they're going to have more resources to use. The players get to see this, but the player characters don't. And so I like to use the theater inserts to give these a little more of a cinematic situation. You can type this in, you can have it copy and pasted one way or another. It just adds another element to increase the energy of your players, which is one reason I like to use the VTT, particularly Foundry, for these nice little modules that enhance the experience. Then after they are introduced, you can clear the stage and then get back to scene 4, the descent. Here the players are going to be trying to find a safe way through the labyrinths of the crater of Megiddo. They can make some more checks, and they can describe how they're doing. It's a dark location, so they're probably going to talk about lighting torches, things like that. They were ready for an adventure. They don't need to spend inventory points to have lanterns, things like that at this point. Maybe you'd say everybody can have a torch, but you wouldn't necessarily want to say everybody has a flashlight. A flashlight might be too technologically advanced for your particular world, or it might not. That's something that you can have figured out during your session 0. Because it's a Magitech world, maybe people use glowing crystals. There's a lot of decisions to be made right there. Then, scene 5 to arms. I'm particularly proud of how I figured this one out, because the players come in here, but the player characters don't have night vision. So they can use this macro to toggle their lantern lights. Then they will use their W, A, S, and D keys to encounter here. You have some defunctional Elonian troops. They're not currently active. After they investigate them a little bit, then as a GM, you can activate the light on Olivia over here. And I have this Hexi automatically following her. And so they can see this get revealed. And, you know, why not? Put her to the stage. Olivia says, "Please, help me." And then they get into their first actual conflict. It's going to be here. Because this is a JTTRPG, I thought this kind of battle map would be most appropriate. The way initiative works is that one character is going to be declared the leader of the initiative roll. Everybody else is going to be rolling to assist them. Then the DL is determined by the enemy's initiative. And of these, the Hexi has the higher initiative. So the leader, let's say it's Blair, right click to open the HUD, toggle combat state for all of them. Or you can select them all and toggle combat state for all of them at the same time. I have another module so that the GM can see their hit points and the players can see their own hit points while they're in combat. Just a nice addition. Finally, the combat encounters setup. Start with all of them rolling their initiative. By default, it's a dexterity plus insight check. Cassandra and Levine. Enemies don't roll initiative. It's entirely up to the player characters. So Blair rolled an 11. That beats the Hexi, which means that the players are going to be going first. And then we're going to begin combat. The way combat works is it goes back and forth. You can use the Lancer Combat Initiative module, which I'm going to activate right now. Lancer Initiative. Reload. Because wherever your initiative is at the beginning isn't necessarily going to be where it's supposed to be. That way, instead of those numbers, we're going to be seeing that they can just toggle whether they've gone or not. And that's a lot more realistic to how it works in Fabula Ultima. So let's say Blair goes. Blair is going to target an ally and use the encourage skill. We can see it right here. 5 SL times 5. That's going to be 10 in their case. And then they can choose to increase their allies' insight, might, or willpower, or dexterity. And because it's Cassandra, I want to increase Cassandra's might to D10. And we can either just temporarily increase it to D10, or there are ways to create effects that will increase Cassandra's might. Maybe I'll make a macro before I release this, so that encourage is a little bit more easy to handle in that way. Anyway, temporarily might increased. Wasn't injured, so didn't need to do that. Let's click on Blair. Now Blair has gone. Did a little wrong order. Blair has gone. And then an enemy gets to go. Let's have this Elonian troop go. Range doesn't fully matter in Fabula Ultima. This Hexi is flying, so only Edgar can use his ranged weapon to attack it, or Cassandra can use her soaring strike to attack it. Either way, the Elonian troop is going to rush forward and attack. They suggest having a random target. So let's roll random target. Who's going to be hit? It's Cassandra. Cassandra gets attacked. He's going to use his halberd. Halberd strike, just like that. Another macro I have is this special effect. So I'm going to use the halberd, and we can see him swing his halberd at her. It was a hit for 18 bolt damage. And I have another macro for player HP. So decrease HP by 18. Done. And there we go. These little macros are just going to make things go a little bit more smoothly, more quickly. And you can see this is a pretty lethal style of game, except people aren't going to be dying. If the entire party is brought to 0 hit points, then Olivia is going to use an elemental stone and going to scare off the rest of these enemies or defeat them for them. Then you get onto scenes 6 and 7. The Hexai ran away. Olivia is thankful for them to help her, whether she needed to use the elemental stone or not. But this is where people are going to recover their IP. IP is the inventory points that they may have used earlier for saying they had some particular equipment, or maybe they used some consumables. But they shouldn't have used consumables at this point because that's not unlocked on the character sheet. So what will happen is they'll be able to recover their IP after they heal, because now is when they're going to be unlocked. So they can use any of these consumables, items, remedies to heal the hit points, and then they can purchase more IP from her using the Zenith that they have. By default, it costs 10 Zenith per IP. If she had to use her elemental stone, it's going to cost 20 Zenith per IP. That's kind of a consequence. If she didn't have to use her stone, then it's going to cost 5 Zenith per IP. So there's a reward for winning this combat, but there's not actually like a chance of fully dying. Then the rest of this is going to be free interaction. They can speak to Olivia. They can investigate the Elonian troops. Maybe Edgar could gather some materials for a later project, which is a core Fabula Ultima rule, but not something that they talk about inside of the press start. It's kind of a little more complicated, a little more advanced. Then afterwards, they continue to explore. They can cross here. Olivia will have to be the one who tells them to go towards the purple glow, but it's kind of been a reoccurring theme this entire time. The purple glow reached out and struck the airship. The purple glow has been the center of the descent, and so obviously that's where they're going. Then we get onto the final battle. This is going to be a pretty exciting one because it doesn't need to be a battle. It's actually the final conflict. The players have a chance in order to speak with Desdemona. Because Cassandra is here, she will recognize the woman as her mentor, while Levine will recognize that her brother is a survivor whose soul is bound into this Elonian Magitech. And so you can kind of feel a little bit of sympathy towards Desdemona because she's just trying to save her brother. She doesn't really want to hurt the people. She will tell them not to choose between the heroes and her family. Not when she can be reunited with her brother Tristan. So the only choice is that they can run away and have learned nothing about this entire thing. They can fight and potentially even kill or damage Desdemona and her brother Tristan, or they can try to open up an objective clock and ask her for a truce. And then the players can go around, they can make insight and willpower checks in order to make this conversation. It's a difficult check, but eventually, once the clock is completed, maybe then they can actually make peace with Desdemona. Otherwise, it's going to be a dangerous fight. Because these are elite enemies, they're going to have their own Ultima points, 5 each. The GM should save 1 Ultima point for each of them, and they can make an epic escape at the end. When Desdemona enters Crisis, she should enter Tristan and wear him as a piece of armor. And they also get 2 actions each as a part of their elite status. So that's going to be an equivalent number of actions between them all. This is a very difficult fight for the players. So they're going to be using their Fabula points in order to keep themselves alive. If the player characters fall to 0 hit points, they must surrender or sacrifice themselves. Surrender, they receive 2 Fabula points and suffer a narrative consequence that's going to be up to the GM. They shouldn't be killed at this point, but simply that say that Desdemona is going to pull the roof down using her magic and trap them under it, or they can sacrifice themselves. They should go overboard with their description, because the character will be permanently lost after that scene. They willingly gave up their life and cannot be brought back from the dead. It maybe shouldn't be something as absolute as just killing the enemy, but if Desdemona entered the suit already, then an appropriate sacrifice would be that she gets chucked out of the suit due to their efforts. He gets broken open, and then everybody can target her again. Something along those lines should work. Or maybe you also are going to be the one who's changing the battlefield as a sacrifice. They topple the pillar, and that's going to be pinning him, Tristan and Desdemona under it, making them more vulnerable, thus giving them a status effect. There's a lot of different options for the sacrifice, which can turn the tide of the combat. Because this is the boss fight, you want to make sure it's as epic and entertaining and memorable as possible. But if instead they reason with Desdemona, it should be a 10-section clock, with each section having a difficulty of 13. That's not an easy thing to do. The most likely person here is going to be Blair, but everybody should take turns, and maybe they'll be assisting Blair on multiple checks. 10 segments is not a small thing, and that's kind of going to represent how long it should take. The modification is if there are only 3 player characters, then Tristan should have 70 hit points and only perform a single turn during each round. Otherwise, the battle might be too challenging. If you have more player characters, I would actually also lower the hit points, but also then double the damage, or add 10 to the HR of all the enemy's weapons. By default, Desdemona is doing HR plus 12 physical damage with her spear. Make it HR plus 22. This is going to be a very deadly thing, but by giving her 60 hit points instead of 120 hit points, you can keep that kind of momentum going, because you want every player character to get a couple of rounds. She'll get hit a couple times, hop into Tristan, and then Tristan also should have fewer hit points and do more damage. This general idea of half hit points, double damage is a good way to increase the speed of your combats for a lot of TTRPGs. Sometimes the double damage doesn't work perfectly for a game like Fabula Ultima, so I might look at what the enemy damage is and then increase that by half by default, and you can adjust that inside of your adventure when necessary. Either way, when Tristan or Desdemona fall to 0 hit points, they'll spend 1 ultimate point to smash the pillar in the room and use the collapse to cover their escape. Then you have reached the conclusion of the tutorial scenario. Congratulations! The heroes may or may not have recovered the compass from the enemies, but at the very least, they have created a new ally in Olivia and learned why the Alonians were here. The question is, what will the heroes do now? Will they chase after Desdemona, or will you return to Denova? How did your characters change during this adventure? How will their identities, themes, and bonds change once again? This would be a good opportunity to do experience as well. The way experience works is that probably everybody gets like 5 experience or so just for having a good adventure. They also earn 1 experience point for every Fabula point every character spent. So if one character spent 4 points, that's 1 experience for everybody. If everybody spent 4 points, because there's 4 players, that's 16 divided by 4, everybody gets 4 experience points. And you can decide that you want to keep going with these adventures, or you will have fallen in love with the Fabula Ultima system, just like I and so many other people have, and try to define your own major story, own characters, and otherwise. I really appreciate you taking the time to watch my video. I hope it's helpful to you. If you like this kind of content, please like, comment, and subscribe. Consider checking out my Patreon or my Start Playing page. I run these kinds of games. I have regular paid premium content, but I also run regular monthly free games, especially when I'm trying to try out a new system. I'm open to feedback on how to improve this module, and I really hope you find it useful to your games. Happy gaming, Have a good night.